You've decided you wanted to do van life, but you're broke and you live in a city. Well, this video is for you. The first thing you should know is that it's going to take you some time. It took me about a year and a half to go from living in a city and working full-time to living in a van, and I'm still working full-time. I'm quite confident that it can be done faster though if you learn from some of my mistakes. Step one is you have to stop being broke. And the best way to do that is to keep track of your money. I would use something like Mint. A lot of banks have their own apps where you can link your bank accounts, something like that. If you were self-employed like me, you probably already do this. I used QuickBooks Self-Employed for years, and that works really well if you're self-employed. And it's only, I think, $1 a month, so not a huge expense. Now, if you live in a city, I can almost guarantee your biggest expense is your housing rental. I think you absolutely have to tackle your business expenses first. So if you find that you have a housing rental that is well above the rest of your cost of living, you absolutely have to find more affordable housing somehow. And you may have to go to relatively extreme lengths to do it. So if roommates doesn't work and you're not saving enough money, more than just a couple $100s a month that way, then I would start looking outside the city. If that's not really practical, definitely consider doing something like living in your car. Even if it's just short term, it'll allow you to actually save money very quickly. As a bonus, you'll now have skills and knowledge to stay in a van. It's actually a little bit easier than living in your car. I actually saved up my initial funds for my school bus by staying with friends and family, basically just couch surfing for 6 months. But you have to have those connections to be able to do that, and people that are willing and able to let you live with them for short periods of time. Once you have figured out how to save money on your housing expenses, the next step is to figure out how to get rid of your other expenses. So most people's second largest expense is either a car or food. With food, you can easily learn how to make just quick, simple sandwiches, overnight oats, stuff like that. Maybe do some meal prep. If you're making your own food and you're eating a healthy diet, you're going to save a lot of money. If you have a car that's financed, and I know I did, actually, I still do, you may end up having to keep that until you have a van and possibly even beyond that. It's a good idea to not sell it until at least you have some other form of transportation. Also, keeping that vehicle around will allow you to use it for side jobs, and it gives you a lot more opportunity. Right now, your main focus is actually just saving money to buy that van. Step 3 is saving up an emergency fund and saving up enough money to buy a van. There are a couple of schools of thought on emergency fund. Some people will pay off their credit cards and use that as an emergency fund if needed. Obviously, it's not ideal, and it would be better just to have a cash emergency fund, but mathematically it does work out better where you pay off your credit card first so that you do have room on that in case of emergency. If there is an emergency, yes, you're back to where you were before, but if you have an emergency and you're using a cash reserve, the problem is then you've been paying interest, often very high interest on that credit card for a significant period of time. Then when you have the emergency, yes, you just paid it off in cash, but you're actually in a worse situation because you just spent huge amounts of money on interest on your credit card. Step 4 in the process is coming up with a source of income where you can save more quickly. This involves working long hours. I've been doing 60 to 80 hour weeks for the last year almost, and that's just what it takes to make things work. In your spare time, it's always a good idea to start an online business if that's what you want to do, or if you're trying to look for remote work or online work, but you have immediate financial problems, so you've got to be saving money and just focusing on that more than anything. You got to solve the immediate problem first. Once you have your finances all set up and worked out, it's time to move on to step 5. Step 5 would be finding your van and buying it. So remember, when you buy your van, that you have to save up enough money to cover the cost of the van, plus insurance, plus taxes and registration and all that good stuff. So it's going to be actually a lot more expensive than you probably think. I think it's a good idea to budget at least $500 for all that good stuff, then an extra about $1,000 for the initial repairs, oil change, just routine service, whatever the van needs. If you bought a decent van that's in good shape, it shouldn't need a ton of work right up front, and at least in my experience, most mechanics don't really like to charge you more than $1,000 at a time, mostly because they're not sure if they're going to get paid if they charge you more than that. And besides, if everything seems to be running fine and there's no major oil leaks or anything like that, it actually is kind of unusual to have really expensive repairs. Most vans are fairly simple and reliable. Parts are also generally very available for these types of vehicles, making maintenance generally relatively inexpensive. So when I bought my van, I had about $5,000 to $6,000 saved up for that initial purchase and the repairs needed to make sure it was running properly. I think you'll find, unless you get a really good deal, that number is going to be slowly increasing as time goes on, partly because we are under a bit of inflation right now, and partly because a lot of people are tired of the high cost of living and are looking at ways to reduce their expenses, and van life is often a part of that. That's why it's so important to get your expenses down and your income up as high as possible. I have to say, this process is not always pleasant, but you know, as long as there's a goal in mind and you know what you're doing, people will help you. You're going to be very motivated to make things happen as quickly as possible, and it's just keeping that dream in mind that's what keeps you motivated. And finally, if you're wondering how long it all takes to get started with van life, you can always do the math yourself. Once you start budgeting, you can just extrapolate your budget and figure out more or less how long it's going to take you to get that van and move in. And it's not going to be as fast as you might think. Working 60 to 80 hours a week for about 6 months, I was able to save up money for my initial purchase of my schoolie and to do all the repairs on it. I had a savings rate of about $1,000 a month at the time. It's gone up since then as I've gotten debt paid off, but those were really the first steps just to get into van life. Once you've done all that and you're finally living in your van full time, the work really isn't over yet. You're only half the way there. Despite the popular message that you see on social media, van life isn't free. It costs a lot less than a traditional lifestyle, but it still costs a substantial amount of money. You still have to work to pay off debt and build a significant savings and really get those expenses down. So if you're thinking about now that, you know, maybe working 60 to 80 hours a week while sleeping in a van at night in the parking lot isn't exactly what you had in mind for van life, I don't think that's most people's ultimate goal. Remember, you're making a lot of money now, so you can pay off those debts and save up large amounts of money in very little time. The next step is really to get serious about working remotely or building that online income. You could have been doing this all along. At least for me, I wasn't able to put in all the hours I really needed to make any serious progress. But now that I'm coming to the end of paying off my debt, I'm getting serious, and I'm seeing substantial growth in at least one of my potential online businesses. But that's a video for another day. I don't have quite enough experience yet to really offer solid advice on how to make this next step work properly. So if you want to find out how I end up working remotely, remember to subscribe. These packages won't deliver themselves, so I've got to get back to work, and I'll see you on the next video.